Hello everyone and welcome to Mathematical Literacy. I am Brainstorm Betty, and in this video we will be discussing number formats and conventions. Number formats and conventions are the way that we write numbers down and the way that we use numbers in specific situations. So with regarding to number formats, we have got two things that we need to take into account. We need to take into account the decimal separator and the thousand separators. Now, there are two decimal separators that we can use, which is either the comma or we can use a point. Depending on which country you're in, this will determine which decimal separator you use. For thousand separators, there are actually three that we can use. We can use a space, we can use a point, or we can use a comma. So a space, obviously just a blank space, a point, and a comma. In South Africa, we use a comma as a decimal separator, and we use a space as a thousand separator. So this is what we will be using in all of our mathematical calculations here on further. Take this into account, as this can change depending on how strict the marking is, whether you get your marks or not. So the next thing that we need to discuss with regards to number conventions, the first thing, is positive and negative numbers. So positive and negative numbers are used as directional indicators. What does this mean? This means that if the number is positive, meaning there's no sign in front of it, it means that it is above a certain point. And if it's negative, it is below a certain point or before a certain point. And because we have below or before, above can also mean after. This is just to give you an indication of direction usually. Okay, so how do we put this into practice? The easiest is to work from a table. Okay, so we can give you a any value, and we can give it to you in a table. We can give it to you as digits, and we can say that these are their values. So the values that we have is in millions. We've got 100 millions, 10 millions, and millions. Thousands, we would have 100,000s, 10,000s, and thousands. And then for units, we have hundreds, tens, and units. That is a spelling error there, apologies. After that, we have decimals. Now, decimals are tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths, or millionths. So you can hear that little th at the end of that. So what does that help us? Just looks like a confusing block of tables at the moment. So you want to determine where your decimals start, which would be on this line here. That is your important line to remember. That line is where your comma would be for the South African number format. So let's have a look at number one. Number one, we've got 54, or 5 and a 4 within the thousands at 10,000s and thousands, so 54,000. Then we have for the units an 8, a 2, and a 9, 829. And then the decimals, we have a 1755, and that is how we pronounce it. We will get to that again in a moment. So for number one, we will have 54,000, and then we use the space as our thousand separator, 829, Then we put our comma for our decimal separator, 1755. And that is how you would write that number down. For number 2, 7 and 8 within the units, and then 654415 at the decimals. So we would write that as 78, comma, 654415. As simple as that. Now we get to number 3. And at number 3, we've got 775 within the millions and a 4 and 5 within the thousands, but then we don't have any values there. So what we do there is simply add in zeros up until that decimal separator point. So now we know that we have 3 groupings of numbers. We've got millions, thousands, and units. So 775 million, 450,000, and no units. Number 4 is in the same situation. We have within the millions, we have 216, and then within the thousands, we have a 5, but nothing else. So we fill it in with our zeros until the decimal separator. So we have 216,500,000 with 0 units. Number 5 and 6 are in a similar but opposite situation. There is a gap between the decimal separator and when the number starts. So they are all decimals, but there's still a gap. So what do we need? We would need to fill in the numbers until that decimal separator as well. But we can't have a number just start at a comma. We need it to start before that. So we put one singular 0 at the units. And I will do that so long for number 6 as well, and then we will write them both. So same thing here. We fill in all of the empty spaces with a 0 and then one singular 0 before the decimal separator. So now we know that number 5 is 0, 0, 0, 6, 3, 6, 5. And number 6 is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 7. As simple as that. Let's continue on. So this has to do with number formats. How do we format the number? How does it look? What does its form look like? Then we get to numbers in words. So a few tips for you in order to work with that. Firstly, you group your numbers before the decimal separator in threes, and then your decimal values, as I've stated just now, are read one place value at a time. Let's have a look at the numbers given here. So here, number 1, we have a 6, then we have a comma, 1057. So comma is there. You don't have to worry about grouping the numbers before in threes because there are only 2. So we have here 66, comma, 1057. So 66, comma, and you write out the word comma as well, 1057. It is as simple as that. Let's have a look at number 2. Now for number 2, there is not a comma indicated on there. We can always use a pencil or even a color pen to do some rough work or anything like that in mathematics, or even so far as a highlighter, whatever you feel like using. I do recommend using a pencil for this, as colors later on we will use those, and that will help in a different way. So your comma would be there. If this number had a comma, it would be at the very end. So now we use that first bullet point there, group numbers before the decimal separator in threes. So there's our comma, 1, 2, 3. And then you can just indicate with a little line like that. You can use your pencil. You don't need any color pens, highlighters, anything like that fancy. It does make it easier, but it is not necessary. So now we know that this number is a 4 at the thousands, 591 at the units, and then no decimals thereafter. So we have 4,591 and 91. And then that's where we ended. No comma, no nothing. Our next number, number 3, 59,72, and that is exactly as we write it down. 59,72. Our next number, number 4, here the color pens, pencils, whatever you're using will come in handy, because this number is a very large number, 676,000,000. So we can put our comma there. You don't have to write your comma there. If it helps you to visualize it, by all means, go ahead. So our comma would be at the end of that number. And now we group them in threes backwards. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Those are our 3 groupings. So within the units, we have 3 zeros. Within the thousands, 3 zeros. And within the millions, 676. So this number is 676 million. And that is where we end. Number 5, again, there is our comma. We've got our 3 numbers before that. We don't have to start grouping. So in our units, we have 633. As our decimals, we have 9. So 633, comma 9. And lastly, at number 6 here, we have a comma there, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers before that. So let's indicate that in our groupings of 3, from the comma, 1, 2, 3, indicate the space where it should be, and then our 9. So within the thousands, we have 9. So we have 9,000. Within our units, 809. So 809. And then we have our decimals. So comma 5, 4, 0, 9, and 1. So even if you've got a very big number as your decimals, it is still 1 digit at a time. So understanding number formats. So we can use all of the information that we have now, and we can put that into certain numbering formats. And these ones are just some common ones that you might be able to, or that you might encounter in your life. So the first one, we've got the capital R symbol there, so that is rands. They are already grouped in the correct formatting, and now we need to know, what does this mean? So if you get on any sort of statement this value, this means that you have that 92,521 Rand and 28 cents in your account. And this is how you would answer it in any sort of test as well. If they're asking you, what does this mean? It means you have that amount in your account. If, like at number 2, there is a negative in front of that. Now, be careful about this. This negative can be before the R for the rands. It can be between the R and the value of the amount, or it can even be after the entire number. That negative means that you're in debt. So it would mean that you owe 805,322 rands. You don't have that. You still need to pay that back. You lost it somehow. You borrowed it somehow. It doesn't matter what the context is, but you owe that amount. For number 3, we've got 51,604 with an L afterwards. And that means that you have a reserve of 51,604 liters of water. You have a reserve, meaning in some sort of container. This can also be given in different contexts without any change in how it's given. If this was given on, for example, your water and electricity bill, then that would mean that you have used a total of 51,604 liters of water. So it's not always a reserve. We are looking at this in the context of what you have or don't have. For number 4, if you're reading something and it says minus or negative 13 degrees Celsius, that means that it is 13 degrees Celsius below freezing point. It is as simple as that. It is below freezing point. If you have got 72 meters and then MSL. Now, MSL is a sort of number format because that stands for mean sea level. So that would be the average sea level, basically. So what does it mean? If you've got 72 meters mean sea level, that means that you are 72 meters above sea level. Meaning above the water on a piece of land, probably. Could be on in a plane, anything like that, but anything above the water level. So if you've got negative 134 meters mean sea level, that means that you are 134 meters below sea level. So you're probably in some sort of cave, or you are diving within the water with probably an oxygen tank by that point. Maybe in some sort of craft or vessel, but you are below sea level. Interpret, understand, and use different numbering conventions. So we have different numbering conventions in different contexts. If we are talking about numbering conventions in cricket, we have groupings that they use in cricket for their scoring system. So in cricket, you could hear them talk about an over. Now, an over means that 6 balls have passed. Now, buildings. In buildings, we have numbers like 12, 14, and it's usually given like that as well. 702, 12, 14, anything like that. It's given as a grouping of 2 numbers at the second given, and then however many numbers given beforehand. So 12, 14. Usually divided up like this. This would mean that the first half refers to the floor, so the 12 refers to the floor number. And the second half, the 14, refers to the unit. So let's say you're going to somebody's office in a very tall building and they're giving you the office number of 1214, and that is all that they've given you at the door. You're going to see somebody at an office and they give you at the door office 1214. Instead of then wandering, umming and ahhing, going through the entire building until you find office 1214, you now know to go to floor 12 and then the 14th office on that. Depending on how the building is laid out, it is usually one direction up until a certain number and the other direction up until another value of number, but it will usually be given there as well. But it's easier to search one floor than to search an entire building. Now, we've also got dozen, decade, and century. These are commonly used numbering conventions. A dozen means 12 units. From here, we can have half a dozen, which would be 6, but dozen is the main one that you need to know. Then we can have decade. A decade is 10 years. This is always years that we are talking about, as well as century. Century is also a grouping of 100 years. This is important because of how we are working with numbers or with years later on. Okay, so let's read this. Let's say, what does this all mean? A bit of practice. So if I tell you to go to office 7054 in a building, you will go to floor 70, and on that floor you will go to room number 54. Oftentimes the offices are still numbered as 7054, but that will just mean that's the 54th office on that floor. Now, if I ask you for the year 1730, what is the century? What you need to look at is you need to look at the first two numbers. You'll be looking at that. Here is where the problem comes in though. That means that we have already lived through or gone through 17 centuries, because the first century is from year 0 until year 100. I repeat, the first century is from year 0 until year 100. So year 1, 2, 3 up until 99 would be the first century. From 100 until 199 would be the second century. From year 200 up until 299 would be the third century, and on and on. So you will only be looking at the first two values here and kind of disregard what that says, but you will always be adding one value there. So 1730 is in fact in the 18th century. Number 3, 804 units expressed as dozens. So what you will do is you will take the 804, you will divide that by 12 because there are 12 units in a dozen, and you will then, once calculated, get that that is 67 dozen. So let's say somebody orders 804 donuts. They are in fact ordering 67 dozen donuts. For number 4, 26 overs. So if we take that 26, we multiply that by the 6 balls that have passed in each over. That means that a total of 156 balls have passed. For number 5, 14.5 dozen expressed as units. So you would take that 14.5, you would multiply that by 12, and you get that that is a total of 174 units. So quite a lot that we covered in today's lesson. I hope that it was well enough explained. If you do have any questions, don't never hesitate popping them in the comments below. I will do my very best to answer each and every one of them. This is a basis for your mathslit. You need to know these things. You need to know number conventions. You need to know number formats, because everything from now on will be based on words. In mathslit, you need to be prepared for a lot of word sums. Thank you for watching. I will see you next lesson, and goodbye for now.